I was thinking about this video I'm planning on doing where it's kind of going to just break down a lot of the insanity of the rotten society, right? The high cost of living, most particularly, along with some of the behaviors of people that I'm not really a fan of. But one of the things that is going to be discussed is how you have these relatives that talk about caring about someone, and I've always clarified that I have a very small group of them that I have like a specific contempt for because I feel like they should do more than just run their mouths. It's not, it's about three people at a maximum. Uh, but as I was kind of sitting here and thinking about it, because I know that in the video I'm going to talk about how there's like a group of people who go, oh well, no one owes you anything, and I'm going to actually make the argument that one, I think that when someone is responsible for another person existing, that there can be an argument can be made there. But also the fact that I believe that they do to some degree think that they owe me something by virtue of just some of the rhetoric that they use. Like, oh, I pay for this thing for you. Just we'll get into that during the video. But as I was sitting here thinking about the other day, just kind of like going through the script, I said, this whole like frustration with their lack of financial support, whatever, is it really about being upset with them acting a certain way or things being the way that they are? And I guess, to clarify, I talk about how the cost of living has ballooned, right? In my state, people are oftentimes rendered having to like team up in groups of two, three, four, five just to afford these apartment buildings. You have it to where people have car notes that are over half $1,000, if not more. I've seen 500, 700, and just all the cost of food as well has gone up to where a lot of people feel like even getting a bite to eat is now becoming a luxury from one of these fast food places. But as I was sitting here and thinking about it, I said, when you throw in the whole job thing, right? My job barely give me any hours anymore. I said it's incredible to really kind of just put into perspective of if things were basically if any of this stuff were better than how it is, would I really care about one factor or the other? Like, for example, if the job market was trash but my current job was using me sufficiently, it could be 30 something hours a week, 40 hours, because even with like when it was like 20 something, I was still able to take care of most of my um needs that had to be met. Would I really be upset about how difficult it would be to get another job? Um, right, because the desire to get another one came from the unwillingness of my current one to not treat me like a piece of garbage, right, in terms of just barely use me anymore. And similarly, I talked about like the high cost of rent and just how ridiculous that is. But again, just kind of like breaking stuff down some more. If rent wasn't so high and I could get a job where, it covered the cost of rent, whatever other little, basic utilities that would be needed, each month, would I really be upset over, different flaky, uh, self-parody relatives not doing anything to support me? And the answer would probably be no. Because it's like if I'm working somewhere where, let's say I make 500 a week, just with taxes, it's like slightly over 500. Um, or it could be 600, whichever one. If you multiply that times four, right, 4 weeks in a month, that's about anywhere from 2,000 to 2,400, depending again on how, if it's 500 or 600. And if rent is, again, just in this example, 1,000, right? That leaves me with another half of my monthly earnings to then use for the other expenses I have, right? Phone bill and gas and water, electricity, all these different things. But I guess what I'm conveying is that if any of this stuff, because I've said before that, like, as a person who is religious, as a person who's Catholic, I have a general belief in right and wrong. There are morally gray things, I concede, but just like I don't believe people should have to get two, three, jobs or partner up with someone else just to be able to afford rent. And when that happens, it's really demonstrative of things not being the way they're supposed to be, right? Not working the way they're supposed to be. Whereas if a person, for example, has a job that, pays them or uses them enough, right, together for them to make enough money to where less than half of their income is going to rent, then you would see the job and the cost of living being what they're supposed to be, where it's not some crippling thing to go and live somewhere. Because I talked before about like I think it's insane that people, they'll make 2, 3, 4 grand a month, and then all of it is just going to having somewhere to stay. And the cost of having somewhere to stay is so high that if they don't get their next check, they just can't. They're going to just be on the streets or have to take out a loan. Like it's nuts. But I said, if these things were, if any of this stuff was functioning the way it's supposed to, it would be a lot more manageable, right? Like if you have a job where it covers the cost of rent, and you're still, able to then pay off whatever other assortment of things you need, food, whatever, then you probably wouldn't be that upset over the cost of things, right? Because you have enough money to cover all of it. And again, if you're, because like with the relative thing, I try to explain to people that we all have different circumstances. And it's like, I watched someone literally live with their parents until they died, like going into their 30s, and then they just have somewhere to stay indefinitely. And it's like, don't tell me that, we are not products of, varying backgrounds and circumstances. And again, not everyone's circumstance is the same, but I'm just saying that's an example of where someone is clearly only able to live the lifestyle that they do because mommy and daddy picked up the tab. And I'm not even saying I necessarily support that, but there's like a general idea of just, yeah, if things cost a lot and, it's crazy, whatever, at the very least, if you have someone assisting you, it's not as bad as it would be if you were just, alone. But yeah, if the cost of rent wasn't so high, if the jobs actually paid, or gave anywhere near the number of hours that are just like close to 40, right? Closer to 40 than 0, things would be a lot better. But the issue is that everything is so out of whack where you have a job that barely uses you. You have rent that is so, goddamn high. And then you have, people who only can offer you words, in exchange for their supposed love. And I just think it's, that's why I say we live in a rotten society, because if any of these things were working the way they're supposed to, I wouldn't be as cynical as I am.